It has been an extraordinary few weeks in Russia since Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin set his men on Moscow and then promptly called them back. And we've seen sides to Vladimir Putin which frankly were unexpected. And we've got quite a few insights into the Kremlin's crisis management. So we thought we'd just look at some of the video that has come out over this few weeks. So let's go back to the morning of the mutiny, June the 24th, and this fire and brimstone speech from Vladimir Putin.
Все, кто сознательно встал на путь предательства, кто готовил вооруженный мятеж, встал на путь шантажа и террористических методов, понесут неименуемое наказание. Ответят и перед законом, и перед нашим народом.
So that was pretty clear. Vengeance. This man will be held to account. But Prigozhin is not your average traitor, and his mercenary forces had fought and died for Russia in their tens of thousands. He's clearly a patriot, as are his men. And, perhaps more worryingly for Vladimir Putin, he has plenty of support. These pictures, as he left Rostov and all these cheering crowds, they didn't make their way onto Russian state TV, for example. The next thing we saw from Vladimir Putin was remarkably unexpected. He was addressing an engineering forum as though nothing had happened. This was on the Monday afternoon. And what we think happened was that this was a pre-recorded taping that was released by accident. Later that evening, we did get something from the Russian president, but it wasn't much. It was almost, if anything, a softening towards the mutineers. Let's take a listen.
Благодарю тех солдат и командиров группы «Вагнер», которые приняли единственно правильное решение. Не пошли на братоубийственное кровопролитие. Остановились у последней черты.
Then he had this Security Council meeting to try and show that he had the situation under control. Here we have the crisis manager and his staff, and you'll see him there, Sergei Shoigu, the defense minister, not looking very happy, looking decidedly shifty, in fact, and also extremely tired. There were lots of questions. Will he stay? Will he go? But that was not the case. Shoigu's still there, but so is Prigozhin. Then the Kremlin strategy seemed to shift. Time to push the father of the nation, man of the people narrative. Vladimir Putin went down to Derbent in Dagestan, and you can hear the crowds whooping with joy. And there he is, no more 3 COVID tests to get near the president. And there were a lot of questions that this wasn't actually Vladimir Putin, that he would never wade into the crowds like that. It must be a body double. Now, the body double narrative keeps coming back. The same thing in Mariupol. Let's just take you back there. This was in March, when he went to the city that Russia bombed to smithereens last year and met with a group of residents. And again, the Ukrainians particularly said this can't possibly be Vladimir Putin. He wouldn't take the risk. It's similar, really, to these theories that he's ill, that he has, for example, thyroid cancer. There's precious little evidence to support that. It makes for a great story. It doesn't seem to affect the way he's prosecuting this war, whether he's ill or whether he's not. This is a legacy project for him, either way. He's a man in his 70s and he wants to build his legacy. Here's what his press secretary had to say about the whole body double health question.
Слышали, что у Путина очень много двойников, которые работают вместо него, в то время как он сидит в бункере, да? Еще одно вранье.
So it's day 5 after the mutiny, and Vladimir Putin is at a tech forum in Moscow, suddenly drawing strange pictures on whiteboards. People said this looks a bit like SpongeBob SquarePants. There was some conspiracy that maybe he was trying to draw Prigozhin. Anyway, let's just say that he's not a master of drawing, but there's his signature. And I think what is interesting about this is, again, it's trying to show the touchy-feely Vladimir Putin. But this happened on the same day that we later found out he had met with 35 Wagner commanders and Yevgeny Prigozhin himself in the Kremlin. And we got some quite interesting insight into that meeting because Putin gave an interview to a journalist from Correspondent shortly afterwards. Putin told Correspondent that he'd asked the Wagner commanders whether they wanted to go back to Ukraine and fight under the military man who'd led them till now. And they all nodded. But Yevgeny Prigozhin, sitting in front of them, who couldn't see what they were doing, had said, "My men will never do that." And I think what Vladimir Putin was doing there, and this is something he does a lot, is trying to push this divide and rule strategy, suggest that Prigozhin doesn't stand for his men. They're still patriots. So we still don't really know what his view is of Prigozhin. Since then, the touchy-feely father of the nation stuff has continued. This little girl apparently wanted to see Vladimir Putin in Dagestan and missed the chance, and so she got an invite up to the Kremlin for hugs and flowers from the president. And I think, you know, this kind of stuff is fascinating. What we see from Volodymyr Zelensky is him and his fatigues, spending a lot of time at the front with his rank and file, with the ordinary soldiers, really the military commander. What we see from Vladimir Putin is the father of the nation, taking it seriously on behalf of families across Russia. This, of course, at the moment when the whole world is wondering whether this coup has seen him irreparably weakened. Not the impression he wants to give his own people. Let's hope she doesn't press any of the buttons. All this time, as Vladimir Putin is busily hugging people right, left and centre, everybody is wondering where Prigozhin is and where the promised vengeance is and what's happening to him. And then suddenly he does pop up in Belarus.
Сейчас то, что происходит на фронте, это позор, в котором нам не нужно участвовать. И дождаться того момента, когда мы сможем проявить себя по полной программе.
And it's difficult to see him, but it certainly sounds like him, telling his men that they are going to be heading to Africa. That's where Wagner has been operational for quite a few years now, but not seeming at all contrite. He said that they weren't going to be going back to Ukraine because it's a disgrace. And then perhaps even weirder altogether, this photo of Prigozhin in his underpants. Now, we don't know where that is, whether it's in Belarus at this camp near Tsel, which I went to. When we went there, there wasn't this kind of flooring. It looks a bit like a carpet. And also, why on earth is he in his pants? Anyway, that picture popped up. Don't know what we can say about it. There he is. Meanwhile, as all of this is going on, Vladimir Putin has pulled out of the grain deal, which was one of the key elements in trying to keep a lid on global food prices last year. And he is busily bombing Ukraine's grain silos around Odessa and their grain export infrastructure. Extraordinarily, he pulled out of the deal at exactly the time when he was preparing to host African leaders in St. Petersburg, the very people who are most affected by wheat prices and a lack of grain for their populations. And here they all are. Far fewer heads of state, almost half as many as there were at the first Russia-Africa summit in 2019. And this is the leader of Burkina Faso, who took power in a military coup a couple of years ago, exactly the kind of thing that Vladimir Putin is most scared of, and what for a moment it looked like Prigozhin was doing. And yet there he is shaking hands with him. This, by the way, as there's another military coup going on in Niger. But you can see how valuable this moment is for Vladimir Putin, this message that he can put out to his people back home, that he is not isolated on the world stage, despite sanctions. This is really the emblem for him of a multipolar world where Russia is still a major global power. But the fact of the matter is, he doesn't get many other world leaders coming to see him these days. And look who's here in St. Petersburg too, Yevgeny Prigozhin himself, back in favour in Russia, shaking hands with an official from the Central African Republic, where Wagner has been very active for the past few years and looks set like he is to continue doing the Kremlin's dirty work in Africa. Now, there is one very interesting theory doing the rounds at the moment as to why Prigozhin has been allowed to continue operating, and that is that actually what he was doing belongs to a time-honoured tradition in Russia, that of petitioning the leader, petitioning the Tsar, petitioning Vladimir Putin, the father of the nation. Prigozhin was always very careful not to say that this was about Putin himself, but about the military command. And he was asking the father of the nation to help addressing lesser problems. And perhaps that's why he's still here. It's possible, but it's also possible that for a leader as isolated as Vladimir Putin is now, Yevgeny Prigozhin is still very useful, and Putin himself is remarkably adaptable.